America is a nation of principles, or at least that's what it's supposed to be. The chief principle is that we don't care about where you come from or who you are, so long as you are willing to fight and die for the principles that unite the nation. E pluribus unum, translated from the Latin, out of many, one. This is the motto that appears on our national seal. This is perhaps the greatest idea in the history of government, but it has one critical shortcoming, which we now face as a nation. For America to work, the many must become one, but that isn't what we see happening anymore. Instead, we see America breaking down along racial lines, and this is a massive problem. On August 6th, 1945, the world forever changed when the United States dropped the first combat nuclear bomb in an effort to put an end to World War II while also positioning against the Soviet Union. What followed was the eventual acquisition of nuclear bombs by the Soviet Union and the subsequent decades of the Cold War doctrine of mutually assured destruction. Most of you will remember this from your primary education, but mutually assured destruction is the idea that both parties in a conflict possess equally dangerous weapons to the point that if either party uses these weapons, both would face destruction. As a consequence of this stalemate, neither party takes hostile action out of fear that they will be destroyed. Racism has the same effect on democratic systems that nuclear weapons have on geopolitical systems. In a world with no nukes, the first party to get a nuke has a massive advantage over every other party. Once a nuclear world has been achieved, there are several cases that can play out. The first case is where the first nuclear power uses its nukes to conquer the rest of the world. A second case is when a second nuclear power emerges and the first and second powers split the world. The third case is when a second nuclear power emerges and the two powers destroy the world. The fourth case is when everyone gets nukes, and this therefore negates the effects of having nukes back to the state where the world was prior to the first nuclear power getting nukes. If everyone's super, no one is. Incidentally, this line of logic applies to all military spending. Replace nuke with gun, and the same logic holds. So long as the ability to gain an advantage exists, agents will act to gain that advantage. In our world, case 2 occurred. The US got the first nukes, but decided not to use them to conquer the rest of the world. The USSR then got nukes, and the world was divided between the two great powers. With the collapse of the USSR, we now find ourselves approaching case 4, where more and more actors on the global stage are getting nukes. Once everyone has them, they will cease to be useful to anyone any more than any other weapon is. With how I've described all this, you may have noticed I glossed over the major downside of weapons proliferation. Closer inspection reveals this major problem. Every moment spent developing weapons of any sort is a moment that could have been better spent pursuing any of a great multitude of more noble causes. Now, in a world where there are more devils than angels, weapons are necessary, making the pursuit of them as noble as any other. But in an ideal world that still features scarcity and opportunity cost, then a world where weapons are not needed would be better and more prosperous. Racism is a weapon. A world without racism is a better world. But in a world where even one group exercises racist tendencies, then any group that is not also racist is in a situation akin to a state trying to negotiate without nuclear weapons in its arsenal. The unconditional surrender of Japan on September 2nd, 1945, is a historical example of how that goes. So, how does one turn race into a weapon that's on par with the destructiveness of nuclear bombs? It's actually pretty simple. It doesn't take much more than a slight bit of in-group preference. For full shock value, let's say that we have two groups of people living in the same town, Group A and Group B. Group B is highly racist. They offer a simple discount of 5% on every transaction with other members of Group B. And because of this, they also show a 5% selection bias toward trading with other Group B members. In our community, there are 950 members of Group A and 50 members of Group B. Each member of both groups starts with $100. They each make 10 transactions with 10 random members of the community once per day. Group A chooses partners uniformly at random. Group B weights other Group B members 1.05 times higher when selecting partners and applies the 5% discount only on in-group trades. How long until Group B has all the money? Here's a Python sim that does the math. In actual practice, the preference can be much stronger or much weaker than the one we simulated, depending on a multitude of circumstances. In a free market, racial preferences should be punished by the markets, but it's next to impossible to find a true free market. Sowell writes on virtually all economic topics. This one is no exception. Read his works if you want to find out more. Typically, government interference will undermine the ability of the market to correctly punish racist behavior. Segregation, DEI, and the like are all examples of this. To effectively weaponize race, one simply needs to inject a group with in-group preference into a society free of in-group preferences. Over time, the racist group will win out because they outcompete other groups. This comes at the cost of total group performance. Just as a society with no need for nuclear weapons has more resources to spend on peaceful pursuits, a society with no racism has less friction and therefore the ability to generate more prosperity. Yet for the racist group, they can gain an edge on all the other groups at the cost of the total prosperity of the community. Racism is better for them as a group at the cost of the prosperity for all. This puts us in a nasty situation where as soon as the first group in a society employs racism, every other group must employ racism too if they wish to survive. So the natural question that follows is, what's the state of race in the US? As you can see from the above figure, there are clear racial preferences at play in the US. Per the data, the hierarchy of racism is Black, Hispanic, Asian, and white, as measured by the difference in rating given to their own groups versus the lowest rated outgroup. Another interesting thing to note is how whites are the least favored outgroup of all three other groups. Each group does exhibit an in-group bias, which means all groups apply an in-group preference. How well can the American system hold up against such a state of affairs? Not very well, it would seem. In a case where we have a dominant racial group that is largely egalitarian, we can effectively pretend that racism doesn't exist. Think of this as the nuclear case where one power has nukes but chooses not to use them on the rest of the world. Being the dominant racial group but not choosing to use racial preference is like having nukes but not using them. The situation we find ourselves in now is like one power not having nukes while three other powers are shooting ICBMs around like bottle rockets on the 4th of July. Recall how we started this video essay. America works by the many becoming one in a meritocratic manner. This is the system that allowed America to become the dominant world power. With the advent of racism becoming a thing again, we now have enclaves of immigrants who refuse to assimilate into American values. Instead of being willing to die for America, they feel more affinity to their respective in-groups. This presents challenges in several ways. The breakdown of the justice system is the first. We saw it occur with the O.J. Simpson trial. Since then, there have been many other examples. We see it in certain groups getting more leniency for the same crime. We see it in the redistribution of resources. Certain groups pay more taxes than other groups. I could list more examples, but the justice issue is paramount and worth focused discussion. The whole idea of the justice system is equality before the law. Yet another American principle. By giving the justice system the monopoly on violence, we can stop individual victims and the family of victims from seeking vengeance. This keeps chaos in check because we can't have a civilization where people are running around killing each other. The moment the justice system starts to break down on racial grounds and members of a specific race cease to be properly punished, the victimized race finds itself under attack and forced to either perish or take matters into its own hands. Even if other races ultimately win out, it won't be without great cost. This cost will be measured both in terms of lives and in terms of dollars. So how do we get out of this mess? Unfortunately, there are only two ways forward. The best option on the table for everyone involved is for Black, Hispanic, and Asians to reduce their in-group preference and out-group bias voluntarily to levels that match those of whites. The only way to do this is for the leadership class of those respective groups to start enforcing consequences on those who exercise bias and preference. This needs to be done all the way down to the level of the nuclear family. It's actually easy to accomplish. You simply tell your kids that they're Americans first and that it's America versus the rest of the world. No more African Americans, German Americans, Chinese Americans, Italian Americans, Mexican Americans, or any other kind of Americans. Instead, an American is an American is an American. If they see a fellow American, no matter where they happen to be, that person is a teammate and someone who can be called on for help and someone who should be helped. If you're not willing to exhibit this kind of preference toward Americans, then you shouldn't be an American. If there is no appetite for this first option, then the only way forward for the nation is mutually assured destruction. Whites need to increase in-group preference and out-group bias to levels comparable with other groups. Given the slight numerical advantage whites still have, if this is done, the country could be restored to a predominantly white nation. Unlike many knuckleheads, I don't advocate doing this through unscrupulous means if it can be helped. My prescription would be to halt all further immigration, remove all laws that provide selective treatment based on race, and revert to a strict meritocracy. After doing this, taxes should match group proportions as should redistribution. Government should not be used to take from one group and give to another. At that point, once racial bias has been removed, the egalitarian ethos could be adopted again, but with more caution than when it was last adopted. No matter how you examine the present situation, it is suboptimal that we've been reduced to operating in racial terms. Demographics are destiny. Consequently, the game can only be played by those who exist. American principles do work, but the players of the game need to play by the rules of the game. Based on the data, in recent times, only one group is playing by the rules. If that doesn't change soon, the grand experiment that is America will come to an end. We would do well to make sure that we're not the generation that ends the last great hope for all mankind because we're too stupid to see what's going on and do what has to be done.